path that we go down.
Abby is seen rushing past Libby.
There's no path going there, so we have to go down here.
You hear heavy breathing and then footsteps before the voice of their killer.
Hi.
It's February 13th, 2017. Two middle schoolers are on a walk along the Delphi historic trails in Indiana. They'd had a day off from school and were excited to spend some time together having fun outside. At around 2 p.m., one of the girls posts a picture of the other one on Snapchat. Then several hours later, they don't show up to be picked up by their family. The following morning, police discover the bodies of Liberty German and Abigail Williams on the edge of a creek near an abandoned railroad bridge. And it would take 5 years before police could find and convict the murderer. Delphi, Indiana. It's a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwestern United States. Abby Williams, 13, and Libby German, 14, lived in the town and had been friends after meeting in the 6th grade. They shared common interests and hobbies and were even in the same school clubs and sports teams together. Both girls loved art and photography, and they would spend a lot of time outdoors to fish, hike, and ride their bikes. They would take photos of things they spotted while out there. They had strong aspirations for their futures as well. Abby wanted to become a police officer, and Libby aspired to become a science teacher. Libby and her 16-year-old sister, Kelsey, lived with their grandparents, Becky and Mike Patty. Libby's father, Derek, also lived in the residence with his parents. Abby lived with her mother and was an only child. The two girls would frequently spend time at each other's houses. In the days leading up to their disappearance, things seemed perfectly normal as well. On February 12th, 2017, Abby would spend the night at Libby's house, and they hung out together on February 13th. Playing softball outside and watching a movie. Typically, they'd be at school on a Monday, but the Delphi Community School Corporation had an unused snow day they needed to observe, and so the students got the day off. At one point during the day, Abby and Libby would ask Kelsey to drop them off at the Mary Gerard Nature Preserve, a local hiking trail that was popular with the community. They'd been asking to go for about a week, but every time they'd ask, Kelsey would either not be available to take them or wouldn't want to. However, on that particular day, she was going to go to her boyfriend's house, so she agreed to drop them off along the way. Libby's father would be responsible for picking them up when they were done, as he was running errands and figured he'd be done around 3 p.m. Kelsey would proceed to drop off Abigail and Liberty at around 1:45 p.m. at the entrance of the Mary Gerard Nature Preserve. The trails are usually full of people and have lots of access points, information stations, historic memorials, and parking spaces. The Monon High Bridge Trail is one of the most secluded ones in the system and is mostly familiar to locals of the Delphi area. The Monon High Bridge itself was a railroad bridge that was built back in 1881 but has since been abandoned. It is the second highest bridge in Indiana, standing at 64 feet, and the second longest, going for about 845 feet. The bridge, however, was not really part of the trail, and visitors weren't meant to cross it. Additionally, the bridge was relatively dilapidated, and as such, it was closed off with a metal red barrier to prevent people from crossing the bridge. At around 3:11 p.m., Derek would send Liberty a text that he was on his way and would be there soon. However, when he arrived at 3:13 at the designated meeting point, the girls weren't there. He waited for about 2 minutes before calling Liberty's phone, and when she didn't answer the call, he began to search the trails. At around 3:20 p.m., Derek would encounter a man named Dave McCain, who had been walking on the trails. Derek would ask McCain if he'd seen the two girls, but McCain hadn't. McCain did mention seeing a couple under the Monon Bridge, and Derek would continue searching. At some point around 3:30 p.m., he'd phone Becky and ask if there had been some miscommunication and if Abigail and Liberty had already gone home. However, Becky would tell him that there hadn't been any miscommunication. Becky would contact the girls' friends to see if any of them had seen or heard from them, but none had. Kelsey, upon hearing that the girls were missing, left her boyfriend's house and met her family at the trail. At around 4:20 p.m., Becky would call Mike while he was at work. When he heard that Liberty wasn't answering her phone, he headed out to the trails as well to help find them. Liberty's uncle, Cody, went to help search after coming home from work and learning what was going on. The search continued well into the evening, with Kelsey and Cody even asking nearby residents if they'd seen the girls. However, nobody had. Several phone calls later, Libby's phone would eventually stop ringing and would take Derek straight to voicemail. At around 5:20 p.m., Mike would contact the police and report the girls missing. Becky would contact Abby's mother, Anna, and explain the situation. Anna and Becky both believed that the girls had probably wandered too far, lost track of time, or had gotten lost. Police arrived after about 30 minutes, and for the most part, nobody seemed to suspect that something terrible had happened. Police would question the family, and Kelsey would then open Snapchat to find that Libby had uploaded 2 pictures to her story. A black and white image of the Monon Bridge and then a photo of Abby crossing the bridge. The photos were uploaded around 2:07 p.m. Police would continue trying to locate Libby's phone, but it seemed that it had been turned off or had lost battery life. At around 6 p.m., nearly 100 local volunteers and the Delphi Fire Department, as well as the Department of Natural Resources, would help assist law enforcement in the search effort. At around midnight, though, they'd call off the search with first responders finding that it was too dark to safely traverse the terrain, and that they'd resume the following morning. Law enforcement also thought that there was no reason to believe that the girls were in imminent danger. They'd learned from their line of questioning that the girls had often done things like go to each other's houses and not tell their respective family members, or sometimes claim they'd be somewhere they weren't. Foul play wasn't suspected for quite some time. Local volunteers, however, continued to search into the morning, and then police would officially resume their search at around 8:15 a.m. the next day. Around noon, a volunteer asked Kelsey what shoes the girls were wearing. Kelsey stated that Libby was wearing black Nike sneakers. The volunteer would then find a shoe matching that exact description, and then, moments later, the volunteer saw what appeared to be movement around some nearby trees. Using a camera, the volunteer saw that there were some deer that seemed to be examining the floor. The volunteer approached the deer and would then find the bodies of Abby and Libby on the north side of Deer Creek on private property less than a mile away from the south end of the bridge. The worst had happened. At around 1 p.m., the FBI and Indiana State Police would show up and immediately secure the crime scene. On February 15th, Indiana State Police would begin releasing a still image of an individual that had been reportedly seen on the Monon High Bridge Trail near where the 2 girls were found dead. The photograph, albeit grainy, appears to show a white male with his hands in his pockets, his head down, walking on the bridge towards the girls. A few days later, the man, dubbed Bridge Guy, was named the prime suspect. On February 22nd, law enforcement would release an audio recording of the suspect's voice saying the words, "Down the hill."
Down the hill. Down the hill. Down the hill. Down the hill.
Despite this, though, the case would go quiet for some time until July 17th, when police would distribute a sketch of the suspect, which had been created from eyewitness accounts of a hiker on the Delphi historic trails. The first person to be suspected was a man named Daniel Nations, who had been apprehended at a traffic stop in Colorado for wielding a hatchet and threatening people on a trail. He would be a suspect in the unsolved murder of a man named Tim Watkins and was a registered offender. Nations had connections to Indiana as well and claimed to have been homeless and living under an Indiana 67 bridge in Morgan County since January 31st, 2017. However, Nations had been present for his weekly checkup with authorities on February 14th and had been consistently attending in the time prior. In November 2018, a person of interest named Thomas Bruce, a 53-year-old, was apprehended. On November 19th, he'd entered a religious supply store in Missouri and forced 3 women, 53-year-old customer Jamie Schmidt and 2 employees, into a back room and proceeded to attempt to assault the women. When Schmidt refused to comply, Bruce would fatally shoot her. Police found there were similarities between Bruce and the composite sketch, but police would not find a connection between Bruce and the Delphi murders. On April 22, 2019, Indiana State Police announced a new direction in the case and released a new sketch of the suspect, urging the public to send tips. Investigators believed that the suspect was likely hiding in plain sight and was almost certainly familiar with the Delphi area. Multiple other people would be suspected, but nothing stuck. However, this would all change in September 2022. On a submitted tip, the last name of a man named Richard Allen had been recorded incorrectly, and so the file was originally marked as cleared. The file clerk deduced that the tip from years earlier was regarding Richard Allen and brought it to the case investigator. Richard Allen had apparently self-reported 3 days after the murders to being on the trails on the day of the murders and seeing 3 girls on the trails. Richard Allen was born in September 1972 and grew up in Mexico, Indiana. He was a student at North Miami and Denver, Indiana, and participated in football and track. He graduated in 1991 and attended Ivy Tech Community College, studying accounting. He'd also joined the U.S. Army and National Guard for a short period of time. Afterwards, he got married and had a daughter. From 2003 to 2013, he worked as a store manager at a Logansport Walmart and then later worked at 2 CVS pharmacy stores, one in Peru, Indiana, and the other in Delphi, Indiana. He'd also get a pharmacy tech license in 2018. He'd been officially living in Delphi by then since 2006 and had been struggling for years with anxiety, depression, and alcoholism. In one instance, his wife Kathy told Detective Jay Harper and a marshal that Allen had once threatened to take his own life in front of her and their daughter. At some point in 2019, he'd been hospitalized for mental health purposes as well. On February 13, 2017, Allen had been at his mother's house in Peru, Indiana, while his wife was at work. He then left the house at around 11:15 a.m. and arrived at the Monon High Trail about an hour later. He told authorities that he'd seen 3 girls passing by on the trail before telling the police that he didn't see anyone else afterward. Allen then said he went on his phone to watch the stocks ticker while walking on the trail. Shortly after the time that the murders would have taken place, Allen told his wife that he'd been on the trail that the girls went missing on. His wife mentioned to him that police were looking for people to talk to who had information. 3 days after the murders, Allen would go to the Department of Natural Resources and self-reported that he'd been there. He also told police that he'd worn jeans and a black or blue jacket and had gone to the bridge to watch fish. On October 26, 2022, police would take Allen into custody. On October 28th, he appeared in court, and then on October 31st, Indiana State Police announced that he was being charged with 2 counts of murder. Allen would plead not guilty, but the arrest was the first major break in nearly 6 years. On November 29, 2022, Judge Francis Gull issued an order to unseal the probable cause affidavit that had led to Allen's arrest, and it was revealed why police believed he was the perpetrator. Apparently, a video recovered from Libby's phone revealed that one of the girls had mentioned that a man wearing a dark jacket and a pair of jeans was holding a gun. He had approached them and ordered the 2 girls to go down the hill. Investigators believed that Allen was the man in the video. They had also found a .40 caliber unspent round between the 2 bodies. Later, they would reveal that the round came from a gun owned by Allen. Additionally, a witness had seen a man walking away from the bridge wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans that were muddy and possibly bloody. Another witness mentioned that they'd seen a car nearby that was oddly parked as if trying to hide its license plate. Investigators would find that the description of the vehicle matched one that Allen owned in 2017. On December 2, 2022, Judge Gull would issue a gag order until January 2023. A gag order is a legal order that restricts information or comments from being made public or passed on to any unauthorized third party, typically to protect the integrity of an ongoing police operation or to assure a fair trial, by preventing pretrial publicity. Attorneys argued that they had concerns about juror bias due to the extensive media attention surrounding the case. By October 2023, the defense attorneys that had been assigned to Allen were removed, citing gross negligence due to crime scene photos being leaked from their office. Their removal was appealed to the Indiana Supreme Court, where the justices reinstated them to the case. The trial would officially begin on October 18, 2024, in the city of Delphi. During the trial, prosecutors stated that both girls had their throats cut. Prosecutors also explained that Allen admitted to the murders more than 60 times while in prison, confessing to his wife, his mother, family members, the prison warden, the psychologist who treated him in prison, other prison employees, and even other inmates. He'd made the confessions over the phone, in person, and in writing. A state police master trooper had listened to over 700 of Allen's prison phone calls and testified that the voice of Bridge Guy was the same as that of Richard Allen.
Hi.
I'm not really that concerned. You went from trying to, I don't know what you want to say, get my trust and then slowly lure me into telling you I killed somebody, and I'm not going to do it.
Told his psychologist that he found God and wanted to confess to the murders. Dr. Walla testified that Allen told her in very specific chronological detail that as a recovering alcoholic, he drank 3 beers the days of the murder, and then he followed the girls onto the bridge and then said he messed with his gun.
Describes a call in which Richard Allen admits several times that he killed Abby and Libby. That call was ended abruptly by Allen's wife. Soon after, Allen's attorney filed an emergency motion to modify safekeeping order.
I've been so nice. Oh, let's see. I've been so nice. Oh, yeah, you're being nice. You're trying to get me to confess to something I had nothing to do with.
Called his wife and said, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. His wife, Kathy, said, no, you didn't. Richard said, I did. She said, no, you didn't. Richard, yes, I did. Later, she says again, no, you didn't. Why would you say that? Richard said, what if I did? I think I did.
A clinical psychologist testified on behalf of the defense that Allen was diagnosed with a serious mental illness and was gravely disabled. Additionally, the psychologist stated that Allen had planned on assaulting the victims but had run away when he spotted a van nearby and then proceeded to murder the girls. A neuropsychologist testified for the defense that Allen had severe depression and work-related stress and anxiety, and the defense argued that Allen's mental health had deteriorated after being in solitary confinement for so long. They used this to posit that his confessions were false and spurred on by his psychological condition and said while in psychosis. He had been kept in solitary for nearly 13 months and had evidently been given antipsychotics at some point as well. The defense would also try to present another theory that the girls were killed as part of a ritual sacrifice linked to a pagan Norse religion known as Odinism, but the judge barred the lawyers from presenting this evidence. The defense had claimed this because the sticks that were arranged on the girls' bodies were evidently ritual symbols, and that Odinist groups in the area were investigated at some point. Indiana State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman said that the possible connection was investigated, but no link was found.
An FBI report indicated the same belief. Quote, the FBI cold case unit determined that Odinites were involved in the murders, but Allen's attorneys claim investigators did nothing to investigate the Odinites.
Eventually, despite any argument the defense put forth, the jury would end up convicting Allen on all counts, and on December 20th, 2024, Judge Gull sentenced Allen to 65 years behind bars for each murder to be served consecutively, a total sentence of 130 years. On April 9th, 2025, Indiana State Police would make several recordings public, including an interrogation video where he denied the murders on the day of his arrest, another video featuring 8 phone conversations between Allen and his wife, and then his mother where he confessed to the murders. Recently, Allen's wife Kathy would state in interviews that She believed that her husband could not have been the one behind the murders and that she's hopeful for an appeal, saying that she wants true justice for the girls, but that her husband was innocent. There has been some speculation from many online that Allen was not the one responsible, and many questioned how it was possible that a local pharmacy tech could not have been identified by people if a sketch and recording was released. As of recent times, it appears that Allen's defense team is moving to attempt to appeal the conviction and were granted an extension to put their arguments together. The defense claims that evidence points to the perpetrator possibly being a man named Ron Logan, the owner of the private property that the two girls were found on. This comes after Logan's cellmate, Ricky Davis, wrote down that Logan had allegedly confessed to killing the two girls with a box cutter, something that hadn't been made public by the courts at that time. Logan had been one of the primary suspects in the investigation's early days, and in fact, the FBI had received a warrant to search his property in the beginning. Logan had been arrested on March 16, 2017 for probation violations in relation to a 2014 drunk driving case, and he'd been charged for being a habitual traffic violator for driving his truck to the landfill on the morning of February 13, 2017. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The state would eventually conduct a polygraph test for Davis and stated that Davis had failed it. Ron Logan died back in 2022 as well. However, Logan's ex-girlfriend had claimed that he was likely capable of carrying out such a heinous crime. Additionally, she said that when she saw a bridge guy and heard his voice, that she assumed it was Logan. Despite any alternate theories or ideas, many do believe that Allen was responsible and that he had carried out the attack. To this day, the crime marks a dark chapter in the Delphi community. A memorial park has been set up in the area, and the Delphi Community Middle School renamed their library to the Abby and Libby Memorial Library.
That he said, honey, she said yes. Richard said, I may have to spend the rest of my life here. Kathy started crying at that point. Richard said, I don't understand. I just got to know everybody is still going to love me.
There still ain't justice. Nothing is going to bring the girls back.
No, the verdict was fair and just. I mean, that is our justice system, and it worked just as intended.